I wanted to do a video on psychological techniques and how you can deal with them and change a discussion that has turned into a debate and an argument back into a discussion where you're sharing information with one another for the purposes of increasing each other's knowledge and so that you can both make better decisions and your audience as well. With politics and religion, you tend to get into debates where people just argue with one another, where they use guilt trips on one another, where they make straw man arguments. A straw man where you're suggesting that one thing is bad because you associate it with another when there's no real association between those two things. There's no connection. But you associate one thing with another unreasonably in order to make their argument look bad. Stuff like that. It adds nothing to the discussion, but it does persuade some people. Why does it persuade them? It persuades people who are unperceptive, who have limited perception, who are slow thinkers, because they buy into the delusion because they want to be happy. The term blissful ignorance comes from this. When you want to be happy, so you live in a fantasy land, you perpetuate the delusion. When you give someone information and it's very accurate, it's information that shows both the pros and the cons of something, and if they look into the information and they see that it's the same, you can convince them, even though during your discussion with them they won't believe you. They'll be adamant that they're right. Their subconscious mind has a very strong grip. The human subconscious mind has a very strong grip on reality and reason. And when you give them that information, it'll keep presenting it to the person you had the discussion with. And eventually, you may hear them say word for word your argument when they're talking to another person, and they won't even have realized that back when they were so adamant about it that you were wrong before, that was persuading them throughout all this time. They'll persuade themselves. Instead of that, a lot of times you'll see people using these psychological techniques to try to manipulate their opponent or their audience or the person they're talking to into believing something, into believing what they think is the right thing. It's almost always a negative thing to see in a discussion. It almost never adds anything positive to the discussion. It is helpful, though, if someone uses one of those, for you to point it out and explain exactly what they're doing. If they were to guilt trip you about something you're doing, if you point out, like, you're just trying to make me feel bad about this thing, this is why it's bad and this is why it's good, and you point that out to them so simply, then they kind of, the way their mind works, they'll see that type of argument isn't successful and they won't use it in the future. They'll stick to just providing information. But people who are vulnerable to this kind of psychological technique are people who rage very easily, people who have limited perception, and who want to be blissfully ignorant. People who rage really easy, if you're in a discussion with them and you don't want them to present good points, you make them angry. And since they're a rageaholic, or since they enjoy the anger, they'll throw a little tantrum and be all angry and won't present proper information, and you'll win the debate, the discussion. But then you might not hear both sides of it. With someone who's blissfully ignorant, they're easily convinced of stuff that makes them feel good. They like the fantasy delusion because it makes them happy. Their limited perception prevents them from seeing how harmful and dangerous it is to live in a fantasy land like that, to live in an illusionary world. Sometimes you can get to them by telling them how when you see reality and you see the dangers, you can prepare for them and be successful in the world and be happy. And if you're ignorant and blind to these problems, how bad they'll hurt them. And their mind will subconsciously present that to themselves. And they'll see, well, yeah, if I want to be happy, I've got to realize all these all these things that make me unhappy, that make me sad. I've got to realize that that's reality, and then you're able to break through and convince them of things that they otherwise would have just been like, no, 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 I don't want to believe that. That would be very dangerous if that were the case, or that's no good. An example would be like poison and stuff in food, like preservatives that are bad for you. Like, you want to convince someone that something in the food that they're eating is bad, you just tell them, look, there's all these people who eat healthy foods who do really well, who don't have your problems of obesity, kidney damage, and all this stuff. And you give them that information, and then they're slowly pulled out of their delusionary world because they don't want to be unhappy like that. They don't want to suffer like that. That's how you can get through to them, even if they don't have very good perception. Some people aren't very easily reached. You can't get past all the psychological tricks that they're playing on themselves and that others have played upon them. A good way to put it would be, they're blissfully ignorant until they understand that their ignorance will hurt them. When someone understands how badly their ignorance will hurt them, then their natural desire to understand the world around them is renewed inside their subconscious mind, and it'll keep presenting like reason and logic. Like I said, the human mind has a very strong grasp on reason, and it doesn't like to live in delusion, except in a few rare circumstances where the human mind will just, the fantasy land is just more appealing than reality. And those people, maybe you can't reach them, maybe you can. You can always try. I think that's about it.